One, two. Let's try this again. One. Oh, somebody pointed out to me that a comment I made not too long ago that people don't name their tools, but I name my guitars based on the idea that they are different aspects of my own personality. And the fact that I had so many in the room pretty much may have disclosed a little bit more about me psychologically than I wanted to. So I guess really the only hard rule is for each guitar, it's kind of like picking your own nickname. If it doesn't stick right away, there's no amount of forcing it that's going to work. I mean, Dita has been Dita since day one. Ruby has been Ruby and Red and Rusty and all kinds of things as things went on. The Essex became SX and then became Cubby after the new controls were added. The offsets, Money and King, have worn many other names. But this one, Pearl, has always been Pearl. And it's the paint. I mean, the C&Z company can call it whatever they want to, but if you really get a chance to take a look at one closely, it looks like blue, a blue version of the Pert shampoo. So it ended up being called Pearl. There are many dimensions of blues shimmering depending upon how the light happens to hit it. It's got a translucent coating that seems to be nearly microscopic in its way of, it just looked pearly. And so Pearl just kind of stuck. And that was its name when it came out of the box and I took one look at it, and it hasn't changed since. Now, why is that important? Because people other than me are starting to refer to these guitars by their names. So if I'm mad, apparently the madness is catching. And that's an important thing to know too. Because if the madness is catching, then Pearl becomes something more than something that exists in my head as a part of my personality. It tells me that some of you are looking beyond the specs as well, and you're seeing these guitars as personalities too. You see, a serial number will tell you where something came from, but a name tells you that they're known, that they have a sense of belonging. Now, this is Pearl. And she didn't arrive with a story, but she did arrive with a sound, or at least an acquired taste. And that's where it gets interesting for me, because it changed for a while. So once upon a time, simple tone knob, simple volume control. And then she went through a period of time where I had the passive bass and treble system put in, where I had one knob roll off the treble and one knob roll off the bass. But in an interesting happening, she threw the circuit. Now, you can say whether the solders weren't accomplished correctly or whatever, but it's very rare for me to mess up so many connections in a guitar that it actually throws them all off. Not just grounds, but leads, the whole bit. None of them stuck. It was as if Pearl shrugged off the changes to get back to the original voice. And sometimes I don't ask questions. I just try to see if I can't get it right. And this felt right. Don't get me wrong. I know that every guitar starts off as an object. More specifically, every guitar starts off as a product. But ultimately, at some point in time, they become something else. They start off being sold, hopefully for a profit. And in many cases, these guitars were resold to me at a loss. But still, they found their way here. Now we know that they start off as wood and wiring, as paint and pickups. But at some point in time, they take on a name. Either one that's given to them or one that's inspired by them. And that name sticks. And sometimes it takes time, like with Little Goldie or with Pumpkin. They have to try on a few things. And then there were those guitars like Jiminy, whose names just seem to predate their completion. But at some point here in the studio, as silly as it sounds, there's a quiet naming that takes place. And since most people already think me mad, I'll let you know what happens. At some point, the names, instead of being stated, instead of being recorded, instead of being declared, instead of ending up on a PowerPoint slide, the names are whispered. And then they're played. And it almost seems like somehow they respond. At that point, they stop becoming a thing and they take on meaning. It could be personification. It could be anthropomorphization. But it could also be a consecration. See, none of those words take on the meaning that convey the event, though. Not in full, but they do in part. But in totality, it's more of a dedication, like with a ship. It's a declaration when a guitar stops being evaluated, stops being looked at purely as a mixture of wood and wire, of paint and pickups, and a list of specs. And it becomes entrusted with something more. Now, it's important to know that that doesn't mean that the work is done. Sometimes they're going to kick off their wiring or have a change of pickups or have a cosmetic change that takes place. But what it means is that they have a space in the room. They have a place that's guaranteed in here. They may not necessarily be a part of a regular rotation. They may end up being somewhat of a legend that rarely gets seen on screen. But it means that they don't come from a list anymore. They don't come from a theme. They're built on moments. It's surprising to me how once a name hits, it tends to stick, and how difficult it is to change it once it gets there. girl came by her name one night when I wasn't trying to learn anything. I wasn't trying to do anything. I didn't have a project or a plan. It just kind of fell into it, and it just became Pearl. And the funny thing about it to me was the fact that it happened and I fell in love with a guitar that was a Telly. This one was purchased so I could have a mini Telly. C&Z was the only company that was putting one out at that point that wasn't $1,200. And I thought, yeah, I'll do that. I'll drop less than a couple $100 on something like that. See, I've had Telecasters before, the big ones, the 25.5 ones. That square body that doesn't seem to fit right against me because it just feels like a plank and always kind of pushes into my arm when I play it. Yeah, I liked the tones. I liked the versatility. I liked the simplicity of it. But the full scales just didn't work for me. But this one just felt right. Plus the maple neck. I've got a thing for maple necks. And she just fit right. And it just felt like, yeah, this is the Telly that I've been looking for. Suddenly I had a Telly. And that kind of shook me because I don't really play Tellys right. I don't play with the right kind of twang. I don't play with that kind of sparkle that Tellys are known for. But she just kind of settled in. She became a workhorse. And that's when I whispered, Pearl. Yeah. I named her out of the box, but it stuck sometime later. Funny how that works out that way. Pearl. Now, of course, the really strange thing is people think that you name them and that shows that you own them. No. She wasn't named to be owned. She was named to be known. It's an acknowledgement. Not every guitar that comes into the house gets a name. Not every guitar enters into the Miniverse. Sometimes they just pass through and get handed off to other people. Sometimes they stop by before depreciating. But sometimes they linger. Sometimes they stay. Sometimes they not only develop a name, they develop a place, they develop a personality. They take up space in the Miniverse. Now, the funny thing about that is, as crazy as people think that I am on the outside, if you're watching this at this point, on some level, you probably understand. There was a moment in your dad's studio or sitting next to your mom. They handed you an instrument. You visited an uncle's house or a friend's house and you picked one up. And somehow, the minute you just kind of put your hands on it, it was a moment that really can't be described in language that people would feel is appropriate. It was very human and yet still somehow almost divine. Somehow there was that connection where it became more and wood and wires and paint and pickups. It became something. Something that can't be forced. Something that won't stick if it's not true. Something that deserves a name. And that's how guitars get their names in the Miniverse. Some weird, sometimes arbitrary, sometimes definitive, sometimes declarative way. But they don't hold their names until you know that it's something more than a way of telling them apart. It's something that describes the voice, the look, the way they speak, the way they interact. It's something more. And isn't that what we're all trying to be? Something more than we are? Sometimes just kind of sits there till you find it. Play on, y'all. Play on. Oh, that would have sounded so much prettier if that was in tune.